Okay. All right, great. All right, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Happy Birthday, Robert Burns. We are happy to have you join us this evening. The program for today's event was, the actual program, if you want to know what's happening next, was in the email that we sent out yesterday. And there's also all the, most of the poetry and the lyrics to the songs are also contained in there. The program includes the text. I also want to invite you now. Hold on one second. Sorry, I'm trying to play this two different places in my house here. I wanted to invite you all to join the Schiller Institute and the Schiller Chorus. And at the conclusion of the event, I can bring that up again and direct you to where you can do that. I want to turn things over to Emma. She and Fred have organized this wonderful event for us this evening. And so without further ado, I turn it over to you.
Hi. Well, I too would like to welcome everyone this evening. My name is Emma Reuter. I work with the Schiller Institute out in Detroit and am really thrilled to be hosting tonight's celebration of Robert Burns. I am not an expert on Robert Burns, but we are joined today by a number of people that have a great love and knowledge of Robert Burns. So I'm really thankful that they are here to join us. And I want to also thank everybody who contributed their musical offerings and poetry and insights so that this could be a really wonderful and I think profound event. I do want to say a few words about Robert Burns just in general, because he is obviously a beloved poet of Scotland, but his birthday is celebrated all over the world because his poetry has affected people of many different cultures. And in fact, his works have been translated into over 40 languages. And as an American, some of the work that has been done by others who you will probably hear some about today, I can at least relate to Rabbie Burns on one level in knowing that his character was absolutely in accord with the ideals fought for during the American Revolution. And Scotland, as America at the time, was under the heel of the British Empire and suffered horrible forms of oppression. But there were many among them, Robert Burns included, who upheld the idea of Scotland's nationhood and who were direct allies with the cause of the American Revolution, including as direct collaborators and friends of Benjamin Franklin. So my hope for this event is that you catch a glimpse of the fact that the fight for a truly human identity and to secure human dignity is best preserved and advanced by our poets. Not necessarily in their own time, though that does happen as well, but in eternity, as their art is an expression of the universal, therefore granting it and the mind who created it a kind of immortality. So I think that universal character is what we must all strive towards in our own time, given the intense situation that we find ourselves in, where human dignity and the human identity must certainly be defended. For instance, when a nation like the United States, founded on such ideals, proceeds to such a level of censorship as we are now seeing, I think it demands of our citizenry a principled outcry of courage to defy the polarization and to defend our fundamental human rights. And freedom of speech is absolutely one of them and critical to the attainment of truth. I think that is one of the fights critically waged by our poets. And if any of you guys saw the second invitation that went out, you would know that this event itself was a victim of Facebook censorship. So maybe we did something right. So Robert Burns did certainly wage that fight, and he did it in one of the best ways possible, with irony, with humor, with courage, truth, and passion. And in fact, there are few, if any, poets that are celebrated each year as Robert Burns is. So though this is not a traditional Burns supper, we will join the rest of the world in paying homage to this great bard. And on that note, I'd like everyone to grab themselves a dram of scotch or apple juice or whatever else you fancy, because we will be sharing a toast and everyone must have something to drink, even if it's water. And as Jen, well, I'll leave it at that. So we'll open up the program, but I do want to preface it just by saying that we're going to open up the event with a dedication to Robert Burns from the pen of another Scottish poet, Joanna Baillie. This song was beautifully set by Beethoven as part of a project you'll hear more about. But in the last verse, Baillie rejoices in the international project to uplift the folk songs, not just of Scotland, but of Ireland and Wales as well. So it just speaks to the fact that, Robert Burns is nothing less than an international figure. So the last verse of the song that you're about to hear is not sung in this recording, but I'll read it here. Or he, by bards the shepherd hight, who mourns his maiden's broken tie, till the sweet plaint in woe's despite hath made a bliss of agony. Sweet power of song, thanks flow to thee from every kind and gentle breast. Let Erin's, Cambria's minstrels be with Burns' tuneful spirit blessed. So let us begin with Sweet Power of Song, performed by Jen Pearl and Milena Robinson. And we weren't able to get a new recording, so though they're lacking in plaid, they're not lacking in beauty.
Sweet song that goes in hearts of sorrow, sweet
Thank you. Next, we'll hear Paul Gallagher recite one of Burns's very famous poems, "A Man's a Man for All That."
A man's a man for all that. Is there, for honest poverty, what hangs his head and all that? The coward slave. We pass him by. We dare be poor for all that. For all that and all that our toils obscure and all that. The rank is but the guinea stamp. The man's the goods for all that. What though we dine on homely fare, wear hodden grey and all that, give fools their silks and knaves their wines, a man's a man for all that. For all that and all that their tinsel show and all that. The honest man, though e'er sae poor, is king of men for all that. Ye see yon Birkie, maid o' lord, was struts and stairs and all that. Though hundreds beckon at his word, he's but a coof for all that. For all that and all that, his ribbons, stars and all that. The man of independent mind, he looks and laughs at all that. A prince can make a belted knight, a marquis, duke, and all that. But the honest man's a boon his might, good faith he can afford that. For all that and all that, their dignities and all that, the pith of sense and pride of worth are higher far than all that. Then let us pray that come it may, and come it will for all that, that sense and worth o'er all the earth shall bear the gree and all that. For all that and all that, it's coming yet, for all that, that man to man the world o'er shall brothers be, for all that.
That's great.
Hear, hear. Okay, does everybody have their drinks ready? I want to introduce, yeah, there you go. Okay, so our next speaker, I'm really honored to have join us, is Maureen Calney. Her late husband, Mark Calney, wrote this book, which, as you can see, equates Robert Burns with the ideas of the American Revolution, which I think is probably work that has not really been done before. So Mark contributed a great deal, not only to the background of Robert Burns, but as Maureen was just mentioning before we opened up the waiting room, Mark was absolutely instrumental in even making the poet known to a whole horde of young people at all. So he hosted 17 Robert Burns suppers in LA, which I know definitely sparked the imagination and appreciation of many, many among my own generation. So I thank him, though I never went to one, and I thank you, Maureen, for being here. And let's hear your toast.
Well, thank you. I'm totally honored and pleased to be here. As she's actually, what I should start with is on Mark's tombstone, it says, "A man's a man for all that." Mark obviously did do 17 Burns suppers in Los Angeles, and he would start every Burns supper by saying, "Britain delende est." Obviously, there are Burns suppers going on throughout the whole world at this point. The Scotsman estimates that there are, over this weekend, 2,500 Burns suppers. Now, the problem with most of these Burns suppers is they will toast Robert Burns and then they will toast the Queen, which tells you they haven't even read Robert Burns or listened to anything of Robert Burns. I mean, Burns is the recognized national poet of Scotland. And if you think about it, really a lot of nations do not have national poets. Obviously, we get our name from is Schiller, the Schiller Institute, Schiller being the national poet of Germany. But you can go through different nations, and most nations really don't have a national poet. Tomorrow, which is his birth date, he was born in January 25th, 1759 in the town of Alloway. Tomorrow is an unofficial holiday in Scotland, and most things will be closed. After Rabbie's untimely death at the age of 37, his close friends gathered on what would have been his next birth date to remember him and to recite his different poetry. And that is the basis of what became the Burns suppers, which are now celebrated everywhere. God, there was a list of them, and there's not a continent that this isn't celebrated on. They're actually, they were doing a Burns supper on the top of Kilimanjaro's, if that gives people some sense of this. Burns himself was obviously, as his poetry reflects, an ardent enemy of the British oligarchy. He was a supporter of the American Revolution. Mark documented that very succinctly. He was slandered by the oligarchy in his time. He was later referred to as a leftist Jacobin to try and dismiss him. There were all these different attempts to try and denigrate him and all of his contributions. But even through that, Burns himself was able to shine. And this is, I mean, the thing that I find amazing is all of the people that absolutely love Burns. Keats praises him in his poetry, Haydn, Mendelssohn, and Beethoven, which we'll hear more about. But Abraham Lincoln carried a book of Burns in his pocket at all times. And he considered him his #2 favorite poet. His #1 was Shakespeare, but Frederick Douglass loved Burns. If I had more time, I'd love to read that, but it's people can look some of these things up. Even though Burns in his lifetime was recognized as the national poet of Scotland, he was officially investigated for sedition. And most of the things that he wrote from a nationalist standpoint were published without his name on them, even though people knew who had written them. During his lifetime, he never received any government support or any kind of grants or grants through the local universities. Instead, he was very much forced to support his family through hard labor, which hastened his progression of his heart disease and resulted in his early death. He died at the age of 37. It was during the trial of another great Scottish poet, Scottish patriot, Thomas Muir, who was sentenced to prison and exiled to Australia, that Burns wrote his famous song, Scots Wha Hae, in protest. Though that song, which cites the defeat of the English in the Battle of Bannockcock by Scotland's Robert the Bruce in 1314, was banned as seditious in his lifetime. It did later become Scotland's unofficial national anthem, and to this day is the anthem of the Scottish National Party. Now, probably even more importantly, from 1787 until 1796, which is when he passes, what Burns worked on most intently was the Scots Musical Museum. He thought his greatest life work was to save the Scottish folk song. And what he was able, there is an exception to that. He does write Tam O'Shanter, which is one of his great poems, and he does write that in 1790. But what he thought was more important than anything that he had ever done was to save the Scottish folk song. And he collected, there are over 200 songs in the Scottish Musical Museum. They're not all Burns, about 100 of them are Burns. He would often finish the composition of the music, or he would put in new words. But he was just absolutely intent that he thought the soul of the nation was in that song. So on that note, I would like you to, traditionally what everyone should do is stand and raise a glass to Robert Burns. Yeah, that doesn't work for me, but that's okay. And I will end this with Britain delende est to Robert Burns.
Yeah.
Oh.
Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you. Next, I would like to introduce my friend Fred Haight, who, aside from Burns himself, actually inspired in me the idea to do this event with some of the insights that he offered on Beethoven and Burns during a Schiller Institute event over Christmas time. So I'd like to invite him to relay some of that relationship to us now.
Okay, good. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Good. Well, when I was doing the daily doses of Beethoven, I started to really look into Beethoven's Scottish and Irish songs, because everybody's heard them many times, but we never were quite sure what the story was. And I was absolutely amazed to find that the driving force in this really was Robert Burns. I'm very glad that Maureen brought up the Scots Musical Museum, because that was started by a fellow named James Johnson in, I believe, 1786. When Burns saw the first volume of it, he was very enthusiastic, gladly accepted the role as editor, and started composing poetry for these different melodies that they found. He changed the melodies too. Sometimes he only had a fragment of a melody. Sometimes he had to change it a bit to fit his words. So they are sometimes known as songs by Robbie Burns. And Marina's right. By the time the sixth volume came out, about half of the songs in it were by Burns. Burns also, somewhat after working with, and you'll hear a couple of songs from the Scots Musical Museum today. You will hear Ye Banks and Bays of Braes of Bonnydoon, which Emma will sing. And towards the very end, you'll hear a Slaves Lament, which is quite interesting. It's a Scottish tune that Burns started out by talking about a slave missing Senegal because he's been shipped off to Virginia where it's freezing. So it really is quite an accomplishment.
I think we have to drink more.
Yeah, speaking of freezing,
Maybe we could lubricate the internet.
yeah.
He is speaking from Canada, a British colony.
I'll text him.
While we are waiting, Maureen forgot one important thing, which I always loved, is that Mark Calney had a mat that you clean your feet on with the British flag. So everybody that came to the burn supper had to rub their dirty feet on the British flag. And I really like that.
It's true.
Maybe we could burn it.
So should we have where we wait a toast for Mark Calney?
Yes.
Yeah. Toast to Mark. Here, here.
He would be very, very happy that we're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do we get him back? Do we get Fred back?
I'm going to call him right now.
Does he even know that he's been
I
disconnected?
sent him a text, Emma.
Okay.
Can you guys hear him if I put him on speakerphone? Go ahead, Fred.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
We can hear it fine.
Yeah, I can hear you too. Is that fairly clear?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. So where was I? Oh yes, I was talking about George Thompson and the setting in his settings of Scottish folk songs. One of the things that Burns did was it was he who suggested to Thompson that they also set Irish folk songs. And I think, as we'll find as we go along tonight, Burns really does fulfill the mission of Schiller, that a poet be both. There's my picture back again. Hold on a second. That a poet be both patriot and world citizen. I'm sorry, I'm just a little distracted as this thing's spooling around here. And Burns offered to create the poetry for the Irish songs, and ended up writing a huge number of them. Now, am I coming across both places here?
Probably.
I think can I turn off, am I back on Zoom again?
Yeah, but you're on an echo. There's an echo.
Yeah, you're fine.
That's the phone. Let me turn the phone off. How's that?
Perfect.
That's good.
Okay. All right. So anyhow, yeah. So Burns ended up writing a great number of the songs, the poetry for them. Now, they didn't use the words that they had for Scottish and Irish songs, or if they had any, I'm not sure why. They may not have been that good. They may have wanted a better quality of poetry. There may have been one set of words for them, but the process that Burns took was somewhat opposite to what a composer does. You know, a composer has to study a poem, take it into his heart, read it aloud, and really get the sense of it in order to find the music. What Burns describes is that he sang the songs out loud, and he had to sing them with great passion in order to take from the music the idea of what the poetry should be. And that's how he did it. So now, as a result, when Beethoven got these songs from George Thomson, they didn't have words with them. They only had the music. That's not entirely Thomson's fault. I think the poetry was sometimes being written later. They continued that process where they wrote the poetry based on what had been done with the music. It's often said of Beethoven that he was just doing it for the money because he got paid a lot. He continued it for well over a decade. But Professor Barry Cooper, who is the world's leading expert on these Scottish and Irish songs and who recognizes their value at a higher level than most people have done before, he insists that no, it's not about money, that Beethoven wanted to take these folk song monuments and make them monuments to be preserved. I will add more to that Beethoven was also very committed to the process of nation building, because as we go on in the panel of the atrocities done from 1746 on in particular against Scotland, this was a nation that was under attack by the British monarchy in many different ways. So these songs were being written as part of defending Scotland against the Highland Clearances and other things. But Beethoven's commitment to it was great enough that when he sent the first collection of songs to George Thomson in 1810, the Napoleonic Wars were on, and you couldn't just send something from Austria to England. So he sent 3 different sets of the songs that he had written by circuitous means. One of them went through Malta. He had to have smugglers take them over the English Channel in order to get there. Eventually, he found that the best way to do it was through Paris, because nobody would suspect that he was going to send something through Napoleon's Paris. But that's the level of commitment that Beethoven had to these things. But Burns, to my mind, was the driving force in the Scots Musical Museum, and he was really the driving force in working with George Thomson, and he's the one who also decided that Irish songs should be included and offered to write the poetry.
Great. So we actually have 3 of these songs coming up, which are by Beethoven and Robert Burns. The first, I think, mine is a little bit messed up here, is Constancy, performed by Marcia Mary Baker and Mike Billington.
Around my heart would
Yay. Okay, then we'll have Oh, How Can I Be Blithe and Glad by Lisa Bryce, who is on the board of the Schiller New York Community Chorus.
How can I be blithe and glad, or how can I gain brisk and broad, when the bonny lad that I love best is o'er the hills and far awa? It's no the frosty winter wind, it's no the driving drift and snow, but I the tear comes in my ear to think on him that's far awa. My father pat me frae his door, my friends they hae disowned me all, but I hae one who will take my part, the bonny lad that's far awa. The weary winter soon will pass, and spring will clean the birken shaw, and all my tears be tears of joy when he comes home that's far awa.
Bravo!
I should
Yay, that was beautiful.
I should mention that you heard Margaret Bates and Renee Segerson doing the accompaniment for that. And next we have Behold My Love by Stuart and Anastasia Battle, accompanied by Milena Robinson.
Behold my love, how green the grove, the primrose banks how fair, the balmy gales awake the flowers, and wave thy flaxen hair. Unloved Russians the palace stay, and o'er the cottage sings, for nature smiles as sweet highway to shepherds as to kings. Let minstrels sweep the skillful string in lordly lighted hall. The shepherd stops his simple way, blithe in the birken shawl. The princely revel may survey our rustic dance with scorn, but of their hearts as light as ours beneath the milk-white thorn. a shepherd in the flowery glen, in shepherd's phrase will rule. The courtier tells the final tale, but is his heart as true? These wildwood flowers that pause to deck that spotless breast of thine, the courtier's gems may witness love, but 'tis not love like mine.
Kind of like you and me.
Next, I'd like to introduce Clarette Carl singing John Anderson. Which
John Anderson, my John, when we were first acquainted, your locks were like the robin, your bonny brow was spread, but now your brow is bent, John, your looks are like the snow. But blessings on your frosted poll, John Anderson, my Joe, John Anderson, my Joe, John, we climb the hill together, and morning I can't see day. John, we have with another. Now we mourn Kalodan, John, and hand in hand we'll go and sleep together at the foot. John Anderson, my Joe.
Brava, brava. Now I think Fred would like to say a few words about the next piece. Except you're muted.
Yeah, how's that? Okay. Emma is going to sing a song that's very dear to our family. Nancy can tell you that she and our mother sang this on a drive all the way from Ontario to British Columbia, which is quite a long drive. It is one of the tunes in the volume 4 of James Johnson's Scots Musical Museum. Burns wrote the poetry to a tune that's sometimes called the Caledonia Hunt's Delight. But for the poem, he took a story of a woman that he knew named Peggy Kennedy, who sued the man who left her with child for breach of contract, of marriage contract. And even though she died before she could collect, the courts did rule in her favor. So Emma figured out that the thorn he left with her might have been a double-edged thorn, just a little bit. But I also want to read to you just what Burns said himself about how the song got written. He wrote to his publisher, "Do you know the history of the air? It's curious enough. A good many years ago, a Mr. James Miller was in the company of our friend, the organist Stephen Clark, talking about Scots music, and Mr. Miller expressed an ardent ambition to be able to compose a Scots air. Mr. Clark, partly by way of joke, told him to keep to the black keys of the harpsichord and keep some kind of rhythm, and you would infallibly write a Scottish air. And certainly, certainly Mr. Miller produced the rudiments of an air, which Mr. Clark, the organist, with some touches and corrections, fashioned into the tune now in question. Now, to show you how difficult it is to trace the origins of our airs, I have heard it repeatedly asserted that this was an Irish air. Nay, I met with an Irish gentleman who affirmed that he had heard it in Ireland among the old women, while on the other hand, a lady of fashion, no less than the Countess, informed me that the first person who introduced this air into this country was a baronet's lady of her acquaintance. So it's part of the difficulty that you do have in getting the origin of this air. But it's a beautiful song, and Burns set the poetry to it for this Scots Musical Museum. So with that, we give you Emma.
Ye banks and braes of bonny Doon, how can ye bloom sae fresh and fair? How can ye chant, ye little birds, and I say weary full of care? Thou'lt break my heart, thou warbling bird, that wanton through the flowering thorn. Thou minds me of departed joys, departed never to return. Oft I roved by bonny Doon to see the rose and woodbine twine, and ilka bird sang all its love, and fondly say did I of mine. With lightsome heart I put a rose for sweet upon its thorny tree, and my false lover stole the rose, but he left the thorn with me.
Oh my God, that was beautiful.
Okay, next I would like to introduce, I guess, both Fred and Rick Sanders, who will give a short presentation on the Highland Clearances and what was actually going on in Scotland at the time. What was this really horrific oppression that the British Empire imposed upon the nation of Scotland?
Hi, Rick, you there?
Yep, right here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, good. This discussion is going to culminate in a recitation of To a Mouse by Rick Sanders. And it was Rick who first, years ago, expressed to me the idea that maybe To a Mouse is not quite the environmentalist wonder that it's often purported to be, but that there's another subject involved. And he told me it was the Highland Clearances, which I had never heard of at that point. Can you say a word or two about that, Rick?
Yeah, well, you know, the British measure everything by money. So they decided at various different points. They did it in India, they did it in Ireland, they did it in Scotland and England. They decided, well, there's more money in sheep than in letting peasants, you know, work and and pay them and so forth. Or there's more money or maybe not more money in that case, more fun for the king if they bring in deer instead of people. Now they graze, you know, they need a lot of space, and so you got to get rid of the people one way or another. So they started these different clearances. They invented ways of you know, showing that you were far in debt and you had to pay, you couldn't pay. They would come in and really, you know, expel people from their houses, but they wouldn't be just the sheriff. It would be like dragoons, you know, 15, 20 on horses. They would threaten you with sabers. They would, usually they like to do it at Christmas because then it's cold, and also it satisfies their sadistic pleasure. So, and deer, for example, were the personal property of the king. So if you killed a deer, that was treason. That wasn't just theft. So anyway, so then you say, well, how do I, as Burns, you know, say, the play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. So he makes this nice little poem about mice, and of course, everybody's moved, you know, or most everybody. They see this poor mouse. It's a she, right? Turning her up with a plow. She's going to have little ones, and they got to be protected from the winter. So everybody go, oh, that's terrible. And then you say, well, what about people who are getting thrown out of their houses and killed by the dragoons? Don't you care about them? So they go, oh my God, they caught me, right? And that's what Burns was doing there. So I think of the thing that Fred was talking about the collecting the songs and different languages, including, I think, Ukrainian and Russian. The idea is, okay, so you look back at, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I think we can't talk at the same time. I think that's what it is.
Okay. So if you look back at the time of Beethoven, the whole world's run by the British Empire almost, and then the Americans come and do. And so how do you, but you got a world with all kinds of nasty people hired by the British, but they may not be so bad if they, so if you get in those folk songs, you're subverting the British Empire. And I think that's part of the idea that he had, and I think Beethoven probably had that too. But it was a brutal thing to see these clearances. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that, I mean, you covered it pretty well, but it really begins in 1746 with the Battle of Kalodan, where the British defeated Bonnie Prince Charlie and his Jacobite army for good. And they hunted them down, they killed them, they outlawed the kilt, they outlawed the bagpipes, they outlawed speaking of Gaelic, all of that kind of stuff. And I mean, by 1760, they had begun lowland clearances, and then the Highland clearances went on into the 1800s. At the same time, they were doing terrible things to the Irish, but we're looking at this aspect of it right now. There's a couple things in the poem that really ticked me off, because you mentioned this, and there's one line where he says, you're wee bit housey in ruins, and it's December and it's too late to build a new one. Because what the British did, besides kicking people out of their houses, they burned down entire villages so that nobody could come back, and they had to leave. You couldn't hang around. They set up what were called crofting houses to turn them into fishermen and stuff like that. So, and the other thing that really got me about the poem is where he says, you have to steal, poor beast, you have to live. And he says, a few grains of corn, a damenicket and a thrave is a small price to pay. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, mice don't steal. They don't have a concept of theft. They just eat. But people, when they're hungry, will steal food. And the theft of the smallest amount of food was punished in the most harsh ways imaginable. Later on in the 19th century, you could get deported to Australia for stealing a loaf of bread. So all of these things in Burns' poem actually point towards the truth of what you're saying about it. And then in the very last stanza, he says to the mouse, he says, but the present only touches you. I have to look back and forward to the future because I'm a human being and you're a mouse. So Rick has provided in the transcripts the words with a glossary explaining what some of the words mean. When we get to the actual reading of it, I urge you to try and follow it with the program you've been given because it's not the easiest thing. But before we do that, I just want to bring in one other thing quickly. David, can we begin that short slideshow right now? Okay, that is Kalodan, the battlefield of Kalodan, where the British defeated the Scots in 1747. It's sacred to every Scot. All the names of everybody who died there, the Scottish people go there. They know this history in and out. Go to the next one, please, David. That is an island called Loch Lomond. Those are the ruins of houses. There's no people left there. There's sheep. I mean, to this day, the Highlands, you see a lot of sheep. It's very sparsely populated. Go to the next one, please. So many of the Scottish people fled these clearances all over the world. They came to the United States. They came in particular to Canada. But the highest concentration of them in the world is a place called Cape Breton Island. It's part of the province of Nova Scotia, which means New Scotland. And the part in red is Cape Breton Island. And I think 50,000 Scots came there in the early 1700s. So Cape Breton Island has made it their sense of mission to keep the Highland tradition alive. And I used to look at that and I thought, well, that's kind of, living in the past. But then I understood that the Highland tradition was being wiped out in the Highlands itself. And so they moved to keep it alive. Can you go to the next slide, please, David? This is the Western Hemisphere's only Gaelic college. They teach Gaelic there. They teach Highland fiddling. And it's the only place in the Western Hemisphere where that is done. Can you go to the next one, please? The signs in Cape Breton Island are actually bilingual between English and Scottish Gaelic, and they make a point of that. You see that in the British Isles, but you don't see that in North America very often. Next one, please. Okay, that's called the Big Fiddle in Sydney, Cape Breton Island. It's 100 feet tall. Music comes out of it all the time. And there is a tradition known as Scottish Highland fiddling, which the people in Cape Breton kept going. What's next, David?
That's it for the images.
Oh, that's it for the images. Okay, now just a little bit of the music. You've all heard bagpipe music, but Canada has enough Scottish people there that they have a Highland Games, which is nationwide. And all the clans get together. When you see this is only 2 minutes worth. When you see it, you'll see all the different kilts from all the different clans as they play Scotland the Brave in order to open up the Highland Games, which is sporting events. Can you play that, please?
Left man! Fire that center! Quick march!
Yeah. I mean, there's so much of this there. Nancy and I grew up in a small town, which at the time was about 4,000 people. But every Saturday morning, we had a bagpipe band coming down the streets. And you'll see that in many of the small towns. Now, the last bit on this is can you go to the next title, please, Dave, before the music? Okay. See that word there, Ceidlidh? Does anybody know how to pronounce that? Any guesses? It's called a céile, and it's a céile, yeah. And it's Irish as well as Scottish. And a céile is just like everybody brings their instruments, they sit down and they play. And they go on for hours and hours. It's not about a performance, it's just about being part of the music. And the fiddling tradition, you wouldn't believe how many people play the fiddle in Cape Breton Island. You'll see families of 10 where all 10 of the people play an instrument and 8 of them are fiddles. So the next thing is only 2 minutes long, but I'm going to show you a kitchen céile. The woman sitting in the middle, the blonde woman, is Natalie McMaster. She's an expert Scottish fiddler. But the other people around it are just people who do this and learn it, including at that Gaelic college. So could you just please run that, David? Okay, all right. So just wanted to give you an idea of the fight that actually has taken place to keep Highland culture from dying out, because the British were out to eliminate it and pretty much did drive it out of Scotland, although it's back now because it was kept alive in other places. With that, let's go ahead and listen to Rick Sanders recite To a Mouse. And once again, I encourage you to follow it and see the areas where it actually is talking about the Highland clearances that we discussed. Okay?
Rabbie Burns, to a mouse, on turning her up in her nest with a plough, November 1785. We sleeked, cool timorous beastie, oh, what a panic's in thy breastie. Thou needna start away so hasty with bicker and brattle. I would be laith to rin and chase thee with murder and battle. I'm truly sorry man's dominion has broken nature's social union and justifies that ill opinion which makes thee startle at me, thy poor earth-born companion and fellow mortal. I grant no wiles but thou may thieve, but then, poor beastie, thou mun live. A damon icker in a trave's a small request. I'll get a blessing with the lave and never missed. Thy wee bit housey too in ruin, its silly walls of winds are strewn, and nothing now the big and new one of foggage green, and bleak December's winds ensuing both snell and keen.
Thou saw the fields laid bare and vast, and weary winter coming fast, and cozy now beneath the blast thou dost dwell, till crash the cruel coulter passed out through thy cell. That wee bit heap of leaves and stibble has cost thee money a weary nibble. Now thou's turned out for all thy trouble, both house and hell, to thaw the winter sleety dribble and cran with cold. But Mousie, thou art no lane in proving, for such may be vain. The best laid schemes of mice and men gang after gley, and leest naught but grief and pain for promised joy. Still, thou art blessed compared with me. The present only touches thee, but I backward cast my eye on prospects drear, and forward, though I cannot see, I guess and fear.
Thank you. Very well done. Okay, next we will have Fred Haight reciting Ode to General Washington on his birthday, although perhaps I should preface it with this little story that maybe you guys all saw on the email. But in 1793, at a private dinner in England, when the host proposed the health of William Pitt, who was the first Prime Minister of Great Britain, the poet, Rabbie Burns, said sharply, "Let us drink the health of a greater and better man, George Washington."
Ode for General Washington's Birthday by Robert Burns, 1794. No Spartan tube, no Attic shell, no lyre Aeolian I awake. 'Tis Liberty's bold note I swell. Thy harp, Columbia, let me take. See, gathering thousands while I sing, a broken chain exulting bring, and dash it in the tyrant's face, and dare him to his very beard, and tell him he no more is feared. No more the despot of Columbia's race. A tyrant's proudest insults braved, they shout a people freed. They hail an empire saved. Where is man's godlike form? Where is that brow erect and bold? That eye which can, unmoved, behold the wildest rage, the loudest storm that e'er created fury dared to raise? Avaunt, thou caitiff, servile, base, that tremblest at a tyrant's nod, yet, crouching under their iron rod, canst laud the hand that struck the insulting blow. Art thou of man's imperial line? Dost boast the countenance divine? Each skulking feature answers no. But come, ye sons of liberty, Columbia's offspring, brave as free, in danger's hour, still flaming in the van, ye know and dare maintain the royalty of man. Alfred, on thy starry throne, surrounded by the tuneful choir, the bards that erst have struck the patriot lyre, and roused the freeborn Briton's soul of fire, no more thy England own. Dare injured nations form the great design, to make detested tyrants bleed? Thy England execrates the glorious deed, beneath her hostile banners waving, each pang of honor braving, England in thunder calls, the tyrant's cause is mine. That hour accursed, how did the fiends rejoice, and hell, through all her confines, raise the exulting voice, that hour which saw the generous English name linked with such damned deeds of everlasting shame. Thee, Caledonia, thy wild heaths among, famed for the martial deed, the heaven-taught song, to thee I turn with swimming eyes. Where is that soul of freedom fled, mingled with the mighty dead, beneath that hallowed turf where Wallace lies? Hear it not, Wallace, in thy bed of death? Ye babbling winds, in silence sweep, disturb not ye the hero's sleep, nor give the coward secret breath. Is this the ancient Caledonian form, firm as the rock, resistless as the storm? Show me that eye which shot immortal hate, blasting the despot's proudest bearing. Show me that arm which, nerved with thundering fate, crushed usurpation's boldest daring. Dark quenched as yonder sinking star, no more that glance lighted so far, that palsied arm no more whirls on the waste of war. They don't read that one at the Canadian Burns Day suppers. I'm going to have to try and do something about that.
Yeah, you can remedy that real fast.
Yeah, I can toast the Queen and I'll recite that.
The next piece is Massacre at Glencoe, which is actually written, the text is written by, unfortunately, Sir Walter Scott, who we will hear a little bit more about later, right? Right, Maureen? But the story is profound nonetheless, and it was set by Beethoven. And we will hear Miles and Milena Robinson perform it. But I think before that, Fred would like to say a couple of words.
You get tired of me. But the Massacre at Glencoe in around 1688 to 90, this is when the House of Orange was brought in from Holland to take over the United Kingdom and begin turning it into the British Empire. There were a number of things associated with that, including the Stuart monarchs were no good, but they were allied with France. They wanted to break with France. They wanted to punish Irish and Scottish much worse. So when this happened, the Highland Scots were called upon to endorse the Stuart monarchy in 1690. They agreed in 1691 to do so, and that they would finish it by January of 92. They were late. So in February of 92, Lord Stair, the Secretary of State for Scotland, and his memo showed he wanted the massacre to happen. He did not want them to sign it. He wanted to kill him. So they sent 120 troops led by one of the Campbell family and had them billeted with the MacDonalds in Glencoe. So they billeted them, gave them food, put them up, and then late at night, they just started massacring them. Meanwhile, Lord Stair put 400 troops to the north to prevent anybody from escaping, and 400 from the south to just sweep in and burn everything and kill everybody they could find. So it was a real betrayal by people that you're putting up as guests in your house. The number of people killed was at least 30, maybe more. And actually, the only reason it probably wasn't more is some of the Scottish commanders did not want to carry out their orders. But it's, and I think Beethoven's setting of it is very moving. So we'll go ahead with that now.
sings chorus to thy minstrelsy. No, not to these, for they have rest. The mystery as the mountain crest. The stag is led, the inner nest, abode of long security. But those for whom I pour the lay, not wildwood deep, nor mountain gray, not this deep dell that shrouds from day, could screen from treacherous cruelty. Their flag was furled and mute their drum, the very household dogs were dumb, unwont to bay at guests that come in guise of hospitality. His blithest notes the piper glide, her gayest snood the maiden tide, the dame her distaff flung aside to tend her kindly housewifery. The hand that mingled in the meal at midnight grew the felon steel, and gave the host's kind breast to feel meet for his hospitality. The friendly heart which warmed that hand at midnight armed it with a brand, and bade destruction's flames expand their red and fearful blazonry. Long have my harp's best notes been gone, few are its strings and faint its tone. They can but sound in desert lone, their gray-haired master's misery. With each gray hair a minstrel string, each chord should imprecations fling, till startled Scotland loud should ring revenge for blood and treachery.
Ooh. That's intense. Okay, Rick Sanders would like to say a few words about the next song, which will be performed by Susan Bowen and accompanied by Marcia Mary Baker.
Okay, so Loch Lomond, you've all heard it, or many people have heard it. Sometimes it sounds kind of rollicking. You don't quite know, and what's this all about? He says, you'll take the high road and I'll take the low road, and I'll be in Scotland before you, but me and my true love will never meet again. So you say, what's really going on? So then you start looking into it, and it's typical British operations there. So if they find you guilty, whatever it might be, some terrible thing, you know, bad-mouthing the king or something, so then there's two of you, you've been caught, you're down in prison in England, and they decide there's only one of you has to die. But being very fair about it all, they say, well, you choose. So you choose, you know, which one's going to die. So this is very typical. So anyway, so that's what this song is about. And you got to imagine it. You got to see the, when you hear the piano, you'll hear the British war drums. But so the person who is executed is beheaded, and their head is carried on a pike overland back up to Scotland and posted in the village where they were born or grew up. So to give you the message of what it means to be a subject of Her Majesty, Queen Victoria. So that's, I guess, about it.
Great.
Thank you. I promise there will be some comedic relief by the end of this. But before we get to that, let me introduce Jerry Belsky, who would like to say a few things on Lincoln and Burns.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me? Hello, can I be heard?
See you.
Okay,
Yes.
Great. I just want to say a few words about Lincoln, but I also want to just mention also briefly Frederick Douglass and also Paul Laurence Dunbar, because the idea that Shelley had, that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of mankind, is really reflected in the effect that Burns had on Abraham Lincoln in defeating the British Empire during the Civil War. Now, I just found out about this tremendous effect that Lincoln, this tremendous love of Burns by Lincoln recently, although there is an entire chapter in Mark Calney's book on this, which you can read. There also was a book written shortly after his book came out on Abraham Lincoln and Robert Burns by a professor in the University of New Mexico. And I'm just going to give you a few of the details. When Lincoln moved when he was in the 20s, in 1831, to Illinois, it was said that he knew, he had already picked up Burns in the frontier of Indiana, which meant that Burns was already very popular in America, that Lincoln could grab a book or borrow a book from one of his neighbors in Indiana. And by the time he moved to Illinois, it was said that Burns was his favorite poet, and that he had memorized almost all of Burns. In fact, a law clerk in the 1840s, Milton Hay, said that Lincoln, he told a reporter later that Lincoln could quote Burns by the hour, and he recalled that Lincoln had memorized with the Scottish accent, Tam O'Shanter, Holy Willie's Prayer, Address to the Deal, another witness said. And Lincoln was so familiar with Burns that during the 1860 campaign for president, his official biography, which he was actually asked to correct, and he did not change this in the biography, said that when he was practicing law before his election to Congress, a copy of Burns was his inseparable companion on the circuit, and that he pursued it so constantly that it is said he now has by heart every line of his favorite poet. I tend to doubt that he knew every line, but he certainly knew quite a bit. And when he was in the White House, he would often, as is well known, recite Shakespeare, but he also would recite Burns. And in the last year of his life, he had two comments about Burns. One, he was asked to give a toast to the Burns Supper of 1865. And he said, he sent a message to the Burns Supper. I cannot frame a toast to Burns. I can say nothing worthy of his generous heart and transcendent genius. Thinking of what he has said, I cannot say anything worth saying. And the final comment he made about Burns was just maybe a few days before his assassination. He was going down the Potomac with his personal secretary, John Hay, who was the nephew of his law clerk, Milton Hay, from 20 years ago, who had recounted his reciting Burns. And he told John Hay, after he recited several poems of Burns, and he recited the final verse of a poem you can look up called Lament for James, Earl of Glencairn. And he said about Burns at that point to Hay, he said, Hay, Burns never touched sentiment without carrying it to its ultimate expression and leaving nothing further to be said. And I would believe, and this was actually commented on by this professor, I think Ferenc Morton Sars, in his book about Burns and Lincoln, that Lincoln took the idea of a simple language to the people and the poetic cadence of Burns. And this directly affected his writing, as did the Bible and Shakespeare. But in his great speeches, you can actually hear Robert Burns's cadence in his Gettysburg Address, where he said, the world will little note, no longer remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. And that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. And of course, his famous ending line that we are committed to government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And if you listen to his second inaugural address, his final famous speech, where he said, fervently do we pray that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue, until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword. As was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether, with malice toward none, with charity for all. And it is clear that Burns had a major effect on the way that Lincoln shaped his words to the people. Now, it had a similar effect, as I'll just say briefly, on Frederick Douglass, who picked up his first book. Actually, I don't know if it was his first book, but he picked up a book when he was freed after he escaped from slavery in Massachusetts. And of course, he admired Burns the rest of his life. He quoted him repeatedly. Of course, he loved "A man's a man for that," and used that on his speaking circuit. And he said he went to Scotland rather, and in England, where he toured, speaking against slavery. But he loved to quote Robert Burns, and in fact, famously stood up and said was quoting actually from the address to the Deal, where he said the Deal has business on his hands, when he was attacking a Church of Scotland minister for taking money from slavery, from the slaveholding states, and said, give the money back. But he always said Douglass said he adored Burns because he stood against the bigotry and shallow-brained aristocracy of his time. And he cited him as a self-made man, which he put forward as really the model for what he wanted Americans to be and what he wanted African Americans to be after the Civil War. And he gave speeches after the Civil War called The Self-Made Man, in which he cited Burns repeatedly. And then finally, we have Paul Laurence Dunbar, who was actually promoted as the poet by Frederick Douglass. And we know that Dunbar studied Robert Burns, studied Shakespeare, studied Friedrich Schiller, and he had a book. There's a very good article by Phil Valente from 2001, which he actually goes through the books that Paul Laurence Dunbar studied and had in his mother's study, which included a very big volume of Robert Burns. And if you look at the works of Paul Laurence Dunbar, he clearly used his own dialect poems to treat the African American culture in the same way that he had studied how Robert Burns treated the Scottish culture. And in fact, Dunbar wrote a poem, just going to cite a couple of lines of it, which is directly modeled on "A man's a man for that." And it's called "My Sort of Man." And he just begins by saying, "I don't believe in aristocrats, and never did, you see. The plain old home-like sort of folks is good enough for me. Of course, I don't desire a man to be too tarnal rough, but then I think all folks should know when they are nice enough." And he ends by saying this: "Good goes with honesty, I say, to honor and to bless. To rich and poor alike it brings a wealth of happiness. The aristocrats ain't got it all, but much to their surprise, that's one of earth's most blessed things they can't monopolize." And that was said at the end of the 1890s, when in fact the American system was being defeated by the British, and Dunbar was trying to revive this spirit of freedom of Robert Burns. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. That was
great.
Let me invite Nancy Geis to say a few things. I know I'm sort of probably pulling one over on the tech guys, but Nancy would like to say a few words about "To a Louse," which she will later recite. Can you bring her up? You're muted, Nancy.
Okay, there we go. So just a quick note, the translation of the poem is in the the program, which is posted at the beginning of the chat. And I would recommend that you read the translation while I recite. I think you'll get a lot more out of the poem that way. My Scots accent is a little bit thick, so it's not easy to understand just in and of itself. But I did want to explain one reference that Burns makes in the poem, and that is the woman who's wearing the hat on which is the louse. Her name is Jenny, and he refers to her hat as a lunardi. And there was a famous Italian air balloonist who was in Scotland, I believe in 1795, the year or two before this poem was written. And he started a craze of fashions. So women would wear dresses with big balloon skirts, and men would wear pants with big balloon pants. Maybe that's where pantaloons came from. I don't know, but that's just a guess. But hats, they would wear hats that were big balloons on their heads. And these fashions were called lunardis. So that's what he's referring to. In this poem, you have to imagine sitting behind this woman with this huge hat, and it's got ribbons and frills and folderols, as they're called, all over it, and then this little louse crawling along. So he's speaking to the louse. He's obviously a little sarcastic when he refers to this woman as a fine lady, which you see by the end of the poem. So, "Tae loose on seeing one on a lady's bonnet at church."
To a louse on seeing one on a lady's bonnet at church, by Rabbie Burns. Ha! Where are you going, you crawling fairly? Your impudence protects you sorely. Can I say but ye strunt rarely o'er gauze and lace? Though faith, I fear ye dine but sparely on sic a place. Ye ugly, creeping, blasted oner, detested, shunned by sant and sinner, how dare ye set your fit upon her, say fine a lady? Go somewhere else and seek your dinner on some poor body. Swith, in some beggar's hatted squattle, there ye may creep and crawl and sprattle wi' either kindred, jumping cattle in shoals and nations, where horn nor bane ne'er dare unsettle your thick plantations. Now hold you there. You're out of sight, below the fat rows, snug and tight. Nah, faith ye yet, ye'll no be right till ye've got on it, the very topmost, towering height o' Mrs. Bonnet. My sooth, right above ye set your nose out as plump and grey as any grosset. Oh, for some rank mercurio roset or fell red smidum, I'd gie ye sic a hearty doset wad dress your drodum. I wouldn't have been surprised to spy on an auld wife's flannen tie, or ibling some bit dirty boy on swiley coat. But Mrs. Fye Lunardi, fie, how dare ye do it? Oh, Jenny, dinna toss your heed and set your beauties a breed. Ye little ken what cursed speed the blasties makin. They winks and finger ends I dread are notice taken. Oh, what some power the gift gie us, to see ourselves as others see us. It would frae mony a blunder free us and foolish notion. What airs in dress and gait would lee us, and in devotion.
I think we should drink a toast to Nancy's recent 65th birthday.
Woo! Yeah.
Happy birthday, Nancy.
Actually, yep. Yeah, we can actually make a little toast right now because it was not only Nancy's 65th birthday, I think it's Will Van's birthday and Matt Ogden's birthday tomorrow and Tom O'Connell's birthday tomorrow.
Well, I'll drink to that.
Yeah.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday, Nancy.
Thank you.
Can't unmute. And it was John Sigerson's birthday recently.
And John Sigerson's birthday.
Yeah.
Take another one.
Tomorrow is also Wilhelm Furtwängler's birthday, by the way.
That's one we should definitely drink to.
It's Mozart's birthday.
Wednesday. Wednesday.
All right.
And Doug's 70th.
Woo!
Wow. All right.
Maria, you weren't supposed to disclose.
Yeah, I don't have any scotch left.
We called the poison pen Luke.
And William Warfield was also born on my birthday. Or I was born on.
Yeah.
We'll drink Mozart's on Wednesday.
Okay, so I want to invite Mary Jane Freeman to say a few words. She has two really wonderful recitations. One is, unfortunately, by Sir Walter Scott, but the following is A Man's a Man for All That, which we will hear for the second time in this program after much has, been said and people can hear it in maybe a different light. So if Mary Jane is available, you can bring her up.
There, can you hear me?
Yes, and see you too.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, I wanted to reflect on something that Renee Sigerson brought up a few days ago. And so I've titled this, Burns is the Antidote to Romanticism, the Disease of Oligarchical Control. So most Burns biographers will deem him the romantic poet. And I hope you've heard and seen here tonight for yourself that what we've presented in this celebration is nothing of that sort. Here's an example of one short biographer. An ingrained respect for the downtrodden and powerless led Burns to respect the American Revolution. What drivel. Rather, it was his burning passion to promote the dignity of humanity, which he knew was embedded in the ideals of the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence. So Mark County counseled us, quote, the need to revive the study of classical poets, including the works of Robert Burns, is crucial if human civilization is to overcome the present crisis, end quote. That was 1995. It's all the more urgent today as we all witnessed the degradation of the American presidency with Lady Gaga et al. On display. So now is the time to do just what Mark encouraged us to do at that time. And I want to make one last little note. I make a preface in my Walter Scott, it's not a recitation, it was a reading, but I forgot to mention that it was first sung at the meeting of the Pitt Club of Scotland. And that would be, of course, William Pitt, the ogre of England. That's it. Thanks.
It is with a deep of gratitude to our fallen angel, Mark County, who gave us this book, Robert Burns and the Ideas of the American Revolution, that I hope today to do some justice to Robert Burns, who kept the ideas of the American Revolution alive in Europe, and particularly in Scotland, where he himself was the target of British intelligence. A man's a man for all that. Robert Burns, 1795. Is there for honest poverty that hangs its head and all that? The coward slave, we pass him by. We dare be poor for all that. For all that and all that, our toils obscure and all that. The rank is but the guinea stamp. Man's the gold for all that. What though on hamely fare we dine? We're hardened grey and all that. Give fools their silk and knaves their wine. A man's a man for all that. For all that and all that. The honest man, though e'er so poor, is king of men for all that. You see yon Berkey, called a lord, what struts and stairs and all that. Though hundreds worship at his word, he's but a coof for all that. For all that and all that, his ribbon, star and all that. The man of independent mind, he looks and laughs at all that. A prince can make a belted knight, a marquis, duke, and all that. But an honest man, he's a bull in his might. Good a faith, he mauna for all that. For all that and all that, their dignities and all that. The pith of sense, pride of worth, a higher rank than all that. Then let us pray that come it may, as come it will for all that, that sense and worth o'er all the earth shall bear the gree for all that, and all that, it's coming yet for all that, that man to man the world o'er shall brothers be for all that.
We actually were supposed to do the Sir Walter Scott poem before A Man's a Man because I didn't want him to have the last word. So we may just skip it at this point, unless there's a show of, unless people want to hear it, and then we can do it.
Let's skip it.
What do you think, Mary Jane?
Shouldn't we all sing? Shouldn't we all sing?
It's not over yet. Well, we will sing it. I really think, I don't know. It was upon rereading Mark's book that I said to myself, oh my gosh, I have to look at this. I've never looked at it before. And it is so seething with hatred of the American Revolution that it's very appropriate for today to understand that he was so, and he did it at the time that the British were burning down Washington in 1814. So I don't know. Maybe you want to hear it.
Or we will play it because it won't actually be the last word. Paul Gallagher will recite Auld Lang Syne for us after that.
You're going to sing the Slaves Lament after that.
Oh, yeah.
And can we sing it?
Yes, we will. So yeah, let's play the Walter Scott, and then Fred has a short presentation after that.
Mark documents in his book that Sir Walter Scott was the British Secret Service agent in Edinburgh, and one of his key targets was Robert Burns. Targeted because anything that had to do with the American Revolution had to be crushed by the British until they saw it. So This is a parody, which Mark pointed out in his book, that in 1814, when the British were burning down Washington and thought they'd finally done away with that nuisance, the Americans and the American Revolution, Scott wrote this parody on Aman Zaman for all that. And he in fact even called it For All That and All That. I'm going to read that and give you a sense of how much disdain and hate the British have then and continue today for what we did with the American Revolution. For all that and all that, though right be aft put down by strength and money a day, we saw that the true and lawful cause at length shall bear the gree for all that. For all that and all that, guns, guillotines, and all that, the fleur-de-lis that lost her right as queen again for all that. We'll twine her in a friendly knot with England's rose and all that. The shamrock shall not be forgot, for Wellington made braw that. The thistle, though her leaf be rude, yet faith will no miscount that. She sheltered in her solitude the fleur-de-lis for all that. The Austrian vine, the Prussian pine, for Blücher's sake, hurrah that. The Spanish olive too shall join, and bloom in peace for all that. Stout Russia's hemp, so surely twined around our wreath shall draw that, and he that would the cord unbind shall have it for his cravat. Or if to chock say poor sot, you pity scorn thrall that, the devil's elbow be his lot, where he may sit and claw that. In spite of sight, in spite of might, in spite of brags and all that, the lads that battled for the right have won the day and all that. There's something on spot I forgot. They called America that. A coward plot of rats had got their father's flag to gnaw that. Now see it fly, top gallant high, Atlantic winds shall blow that, and Yankee loud beware your crown, their cans in hand a claw that. For on the land or on the sea, where the breezes blow that, the British flag shall dare the gree, and win the day for all that. Real disdain and hatred, and we intend to end it.
We didn't clap, which was the right thing to do.
All right, Fred, why don't you go ahead with your next bit?
Yeah, this is fairly short. Now, I want to say one thing about what the poem that Mary Jane was reading, though. It's written in 1814 when the British were burning down the White House during the War of 1812. Napoleon was on his way out. The Congress of Vienna was being established. Monarchies, they intended to reestablish monarchies and empires everywhere throughout Europe and just outlaw anything like the American Revolution ever happening there again. And he's just celebrating that in a kind of obscene way. But anyhow, a couple of verses here. I just discovered this one, but it's only one verse, so I have to read it to you. While Europe's eye is fixed on mighty things, the fate of empires and the fall of kings, while quacks of state must produce his plan, and even children list the rights of man, amidst this mighty fuss, just let me mention, the rights of women merit some attention. And then this one is from the Scots Musical Museum. It's in volume 4, and the music was established. Burns set the words for it. So he's setting Scottish songs. But listen to this. He said, It's called the Slaves Lament. It was in sweet Senegal that my foes did me enthrall, for the lands of Virginia, oh, torn from that lovely shore, and must see it nevermore. And alas, I am weary, weary, oh. And if anything proves that Burns is not just a Scottish patriot, but a world citizen, it's that. And we have a short recording of Emma singing that first line, I think.
It was in sweet Senegal that my foes did me enthrall, for the lands of Virginia, oh, torn from that lovely shore, and must never see it more. And alas, I am weary, weary, oh, torn from that lovely shore, and must never see it more. And alas, I am weary, weary, oh.
Okay, and then the last thing that I'm just going to say is that we don't want to glorify everything Scottish. The two Stuart monarchs were terrible. But when somebody's people who's been fighting accomplishes something great and should be acknowledged, and I'm going to mention something here that is just generally not known. The Highland Scots, even before Burns, before the Battle of Kalodan, tried to get away from England, tried to set up colonies elsewhere, including Panama. They went to Darien, Panama, and that didn't work out for them so well. But then they set up a town in Georgia, in James Edward Oglethorpe's Georgia, called Darien. Oglethorpe, as you may know, is the fellow who came over, founded Georgia, and banned slavery in order to fight against what was going on in especially South Carolina with the growth of slavery. There was an effort to try and introduce slavery into Georgia, which he had banned, and Oglethorpe organized numbers of people, including the Highland Scots in Darien. And the Darien Petition in 1735 actually became the first acknowledgement by anybody in the Western Hemisphere that African Americans had rights. So here is the fifth point of the Darien Petition. It is shocking to human nature that any race of mankind and their posterity should be sentenced to perpetual slavery. Nor in justice can we think otherwise of it, that they are thrown amongst us to be our scourge one day or other for our sins. And as freedom must be as dear to them as it is to us, what a scene of horror must it bring about. And that tradition was continued in 1775, the year before the Declaration of Independence. The town of Darien passed a resolution calling to outlaw slavery and calling for the manumission of slaves. And you know, 1735, we're talking 130 years before slavery was actually ended. So this is a little bit of history that is not known and should be known as part of everything that we're looking at tonight. And with that, I think we're going to close. Emma's going to lead the closure, but with Auld Lang Syne and Paul reciting it. But if we have time, Maureen's here who knows so much about this. And I was just wondering if Maureen had anything to say or to add in terms of what she's heard so far tonight. Is she still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Not really. I think we should just enjoy Burns. He has a wonderful sense of humor, and he just ridicules the hell out of the enemy. And that, what could be better than that? Whether you do it in poetry, you do it in song, what could be better than that? So
we need him to write a poem about Facebook.
That's true.
Okay, Emma, you want to Zoom?
Yeah, we'll have Paul Gallagher recite Auld Lang Syne, and then people will find the music to Auld Lang Syne in the program if you've downloaded it, and we can sing along together with some bagpipes afterwards. But I really want to just thank everyone so much. This was a really awesome event, and I'm glad that there's so much enthusiasm about Robert Burns and everything surrounding that. And it was nice to hear from people all over the country. And I know that we are joined by an international audience, and I think Liliana was supposed to get on. I'm not sure if she's here, but just to underscore, you know, the international nature, or not even international, just like the universal nature of Robert Burns, such that he does have an international effect. I think is witnessed by the fact that we are joined by people, you know, outside of the United States and probably on a couple of continents, I think. So I will leave it at that and let Paul have the last word with Auld Lang Syne, and then I will be very happy to sing along with all of you, though muted.
Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and days a lang syne? For Auld Lang Syne, my Joe, for Auld Lang Syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet, for Auld Lang Syne. We too have run about the braes and pulled the daisies fine, but we'd wandered many a weary foot sin Auld Lang Syne. We too have paddled in the burn till morning sun till dine, but seas between us broad have roared sin Auld Lang Syne. For Auld Lang Syne, my Joe, for Auld Lang Syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet, for Auld Lang Syne. Then here's a hand, my trusty fair, and gie us a hand of thine, and we'll take a right good willy wot for Auld Lang Syne. And surely you'll be your pint stoop, and surely I'll be mine, and we'll take a cup of kindness yet for Auld Lang Syne. For Auld Lang Syne, my dear, for Auld Lang Syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for Auld Lang Syne.
Okay, that was probably confusing on everyone's part.
Thank you, Emma and Fred and all the hosts. And a toast to Pittsburgh, whose pipe band won the World Bagpipers in Glasgow National Games in 2019 before the pandemic. Carnegie Mellon Pipe Band.
We'll all drink to that.
Thank you.
Please. I also say before people leave, I want to thank the Schiller New York City Chorus for hosting
this
event, using the platform. And maybe Jen or someone can post a link in the chat for people to join the Schiller Institute. In fact, if you do it today and you become a member, you can engage in a discussion with the founder, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, tomorrow evening, I believe, or maybe day. And of course, whether you love to sing or not, you should join our chorus. And since it's on Zoom, you have no excuse to not be there, which probably take my own advice on that one.
And we'll donate for all that. For all that, we donate.
And donate, yes.
And thank you, Emma, for organizing this. Brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Please join the chorus and the Schiller Institute. And if you enjoyed this program tonight and you can contribute, we appreciate that as well. Thank you so much, everybody.